Welcome to the All-In Recruitment podcast by Manatal, where we explore best practices, learnings, and trends with leaders in the recruitment space. If you've liked our content so far, please subscribe to our channels on YouTube and Spotify, and do stay tuned for our weekly episodes. My name is Lydia, and with us this week is Ashlee Gerow, Senior Manager for Employer Brand at HubSpot. Hello, Ashlee. Thank you for joining us on this podcast.
Hi, Lydia. So good to see you. Thank you for having me.
So, Ashlee, you've come from a communications and marketing background, right? And over the past several years, I understand you've been managing employer branding for large organizations. And I can totally see how this is related. So walk us through that journey, Ashlee. What were some of the pivotal points for you in the employer branding space?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And, it's interesting when you talk to anybody in employer brand, how everyone got here is different. You have some people who come from recruiting into employer brand and some people like me who come from, marketing. I started my career in the agency space. So I started in public relations, actually. I came out of school, thought that's what I wanted to do. I learned pretty quickly that wasn't what I wanted to do. So then I went into larger B2C agency work. So working on advertising campaigns, larger brand strategy and marketing. And I spent about 10 plus years in the agency space. And I ended my agency career working with B2B agencies in brand strategy. And, I transitioned into employer brand for a couple reasons. Number one, I was ready to get out of the agency grind. Quite frankly, I wanted to kind of go in-house somewhere, focus on one brand. And employer brand is something that just kind of came across my desk. I had never heard of it before. This was 6 years ago. So, employer brand now is having a little bit of a comeuppance. People are understanding the value of it. We're seeing a lot more of it, kind of given what's happening in the market. But 6 years ago, it was still a pretty new space. And so I had never heard of it. And had a friend who kind of flagged the opportunity to me at a company called Red Hat, who is now owned by IBM. And it sounded like an interesting challenge for me, focusing on people rather than product. The bulk of my work in the B2B space was around product and product marketing. And this was about people. This was telling the human story. And that was a really interesting challenge for me. And so I just kind of took the leap and decided to try something new. And I loved it. I was at Red Hat for about 4.5 years or so. And I've been at HubSpot a year and a few months.
And HubSpot is a clear leader in the employer branding space. So what are some initiatives, Ashlee, that you've managed at HubSpot personally since taking on this role last year?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really attracted me to HubSpot is that, the employer brand team, and all credit goes to my predecessors, the team that was here before me, have done a really great job at top of funnel and that larger employer brand awareness story. What does it mean to work at HubSpot around things like our culture, our commitment to hybrid work, our commitment to diversity, inclusion, and belonging? So all of those messages are really solidified. And the year of 2022, like everyone, was a year that we really, I call it the year of adaptability. I think for our team, we spend a lot of time certainly supporting a larger volume of hiring the beginning of the year. And then things really slowed down in the tech world in terms of hiring. And so we really had to pivot away from what I would call large volume, top of funnel campaigns into things that were more targeted to make sure we were targeting the right talent for the right roles, the right teams at the right time. And that is a different initiative. And it required us to position ourselves differently. For example, a huge audience for us, as most tech companies, is the product engineering audience. And what they care about and what they want, what their hierarchy of needs are, is so different than when you're talking about a salesperson or myself in marketing, and even down to where somebody's at in their career, right? Somebody who's just starting out cares and needs much different things than somebody who's in a mid to senior role. And so a lot of what we did this year was try to take a step back and say, okay, what are the real talent profiles that we need to focus on, and how can we create content that's really specific to them? And one of the things we did to do that, we have a HubSpot product blog, and it's a blog dedicated solely to product engineering audience. But historically, that blog has been very culture-based. So a lot of stories about day in the life and what it's like to work at HubSpot, which are great. We tell those stories across all our channels, but we weren't making it technical enough for engineers to really understand that HubSpot is a place you can come and do really cool technical work. You can solve hard problems, and it's a place to grow your technical career. And so this year, we really wanted to make sure that we made a real effort to really turn the content mix upside down and really become a more technical outlet. And we were able to do that in partnership with our product engineering org and through some partnerships that we had to build there for collaboration. And we've seen a huge response in terms of our numbers. And we know that that's an area we need to go even further in for 2023. So that's just one example of how a lot of what we're doing is leaning out of what I would call top of funnel broad messaging, although we still have to tell that story, into what does that mean at a role level, at a team level? What does that experience feel like? And how do we make that a little more technical?
You mentioned the hierarchy of needs, right, for a specific role. How would you describe the hierarchy of needs for an employer branding professional, for instance?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I think a lot of it is specific to the role that we're talking about and where that person is in their career. I'll speak for myself. When I came into a more senior role, having a more of a marketing background. And I think there's the things that you need from a professional development perspective that I was looking for. So is there opportunity? Is there support? Are there resources? Is it a collaborative, supportive, inclusive environment? And then there's the things that I just need personally, right? Is there support for me and my family? Compensation is table stakes at this point. Do the benefits match what I need? And those are all in the mix. But I think, overall HubSpot does a really great job. And what I was so impressed by is this idea of kind of total rewards or benefits, however you want to talk about it, can be really flexible to the individual. And that's something that we talk a lot about in the employer brand space is, what I need and what's rewarding for me is going to be different than you, Lydia, for example. And how do we make sure that we highlight that there's flexibility there?
And an employer brand permeates through networks and circles of friends and even fellow job seekers. We often look to them for validation sometimes, say, what do you think of this company? And have you applied before? So what might be 3 biggest hurdles you've seen for employer branding today, especially in the disruptive environments that we've been seeing recently?
Yeah, I think, 2022, like I said, the year of adaptability, it's been a year of challenges too for anybody working in the recruiting and the employer brand space. I talk about them together sometimes. We sit as part of our recruiting org. We're very close to that organization. So, I think number one is a no-brainer. The volatility of the talent market has been a huge challenge for the organization and for recruiters, certainly, but also from an employer brand standpoint. It changes our priorities. It changes our focus. It changes our budgets. It changes our projects. It changes everything when our hiring projections change with it. So we really had to again, move away from kind of the broader top of funnel messaging into things that are more targeted, which is new for us. And it's a new approach. And we've really had to figure out how to adapt to that and quickly. As a result of that, I think the second thing is I think we're seeing across a lot of different companies, the portfolio and the definition of employer brand is changing a little bit. So where I think, again, I keep saying top of funnel, I feel like that's a buzzword of this discussion, but where a lot of times employer brand teams are meant to tell the larger story, the everything to everybody story. Well, we want to share messaging and share stories that can apply no matter where you come and work in the company. And I think that's true. And we still have to do that. But 2022 was a year that we really saw ourselves being pulled further down the recruiting funnel and being asked to really support the business objectives, which were very specific to certain teams and certain groups. And that changes our tools, that changes our content, that changes our budget, that changes everything for us. And so I think seeing a shift a little bit in the portfolio into what I would call recruitment marketing has been a challenge and has been something we've had to really kind of adjust to. And then I think also a big one, maybe the third one I would say is, our employer brand team, like many, we are a content marketing team at the end of the day. And our content is only as good as how authentic it is to the experience, because we don't want to bait and switch anyone. And so maintaining that authenticity in a time that's challenging for the industry, for the company, for everyone's company is hard, because you want to make sure that it's a little aspirational. You want to make sure that we're still sharing stories that make people want to come and be a part of HubSpot. But we also have to be honest about what's going on behind the scenes and what that feels like in different roles, and what that means for changes in product, what that means for changes in on our sales teams and some of the things there. So maintaining that authenticity has been a real hurdle in 2022, and it will continue to be. And it's requiring us to do things like take a step back and reassess things like our EVP. How
often do you reassess your EVP?
I've only been at HubSpot for about a year and a half. And so I think the existing EVP had been there for probably 2 or 3 years. It's really focused on things like our hybrid work approach and the consistency there, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, our commitment to that, and things like sustainability and ESG, and then also our culture. And so we've kind of lived in those 3 pillars, and I think those pillars are still right. But once, we're kind of on the other side of how the whole world changed, the whole working world changed for COVID, we really realized we need to take a step back and make sure we're still that employer. Are we still offering the same things? Are people expecting the same things? Is the experience the same? The answer is no. I don't think the experience is the same anywhere after what we all went through in the past 2 to 3 years. And so really making sure that we are using this opportunity as a way to learn. We're talking to a ton of employees. We're talking to our customers. Our mission is to help millions of customers grow better. And we feel strongly and deeply about that partnership. We want to understand what they think of us as an employer and what are their interactions like with our employees. And does that hold true to the values that we've shared with them? We talk to alumni, people who have left the company, good, bad, and different. What was their experience? What is their experience at their new employer? And how does that compare? And so we're doing all of that work now. We're about halfway through that partnership or that process through a deep partnership with our culture team to really understand how have we changed? What are we offering now? How do we need to continue to evolve? And from a messaging and external promotion perspective, how do we package that in a way that is not only exciting and not only something that really kind of shines a bright light on the great reasons to join HubSpot, but is also authentic. It's not only are you a good fit for HubSpot, it's is HubSpot a good fit for you? And I think the answer to that question is probably different than it was 3 years ago. And it's our job as an employer brand in partnership with culture and DI&B and our other HR partners to make sure that we're telling that story in the right way.
And on that note, so how would you describe a good place to work?
That's a really interesting question, because I think one of the most interesting things about employer brand is that's a little bit of a moving target, because depending on who you're talking to, the answer is different. And again, that goes back to the hierarchy of needs, right? How we qualify ourselves as a good place to work and what we think is great about us as an employer may not be how you describe a great place to work, may not be how an engineer describes a great place to work. And so a lot of that is figuring out down to the talent persona or the candidate persona or the talent profile level. What are their care abouts? What are the things that they would use to define a good place to work? And then can we do those things? First of all, is that real? Is that something we provide? And then number 2, how do we get that message and that content to them? So I don't think there's a silver bullet there. I don't think there's a single answer to that. And I think that's an exciting challenge that from an employer brand perspective is it changes depending on who you're talking to. And it means that our content has to be even more targeted.
And as your content evolves, basically, depending on what you find out and all the different insights that you get from all the points that you mentioned earlier, you then roll out your employer branding campaigns, right? So how do you go about measuring the success of your campaign strategy and the overall outreach?
That's a great question. And I think that's a question that I get asked that question a lot, because I think how we measure the impact of employer brand it's a hard question to answer, because I think there's kind of 2 separate sets of data that we're talking about. I think there's traditional marketing data, which is likes, engagements, click-throughs, all of those things that are channel-based. And that helps us understand how effective our content is. Is our content working to the right people and in the right way? Are they engaged? Are they clicking through in all the places we want them to? Are they landing on our career site? Are they going into the application process? What does that look like? So that's one set of data. And that's the data that's easier. That's the easy data we can pull. We can gather some learnings and apply them pretty quickly. The second set of data, which is how does that inform what you'll hear me say, butts and seats at the end of the day? How does that inform that we are moving our hiring numbers? How does that inform that we've hired enough senior engineers into this team within this, this time frame? And I think the answer is that's correlated, not causal. So we can't say that if you go onto our HubSpot Life and you engage the Instagram takeover from one of our engineers, that then you go and apply and that then you get into the process and 6 months later you are onboarded. That those data points don't connect right now. Mm-hmm. And so we're having to do a lot of honestly organic connection of that stuff and kind of work backwards and work in deep partnership with our people analytics team. Mm-hmm. But I think, the first part, that how is our content performing to the right audience? I think that's the stuff that we're good at. And that's the stuff that we can use to learn. The other piece, how that connects directly into hiring, is what our stakeholders and our business leaders want us to get to faster. And I don't think we've figured it out yet, but we're getting closer.
And building a strong employer brand is for the long haul, right? And it takes time, as you said. But for some companies, especially those without a mature employer brand, there is the challenge of connecting that employer brand with the corporate brand, and then also the pillars of its business. So how do you develop a strong EVP in order to ensure that your talent strategies for business and culture are both aligned?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a very timely one because we are in the middle of this process. We're probably halfway through, like I said, kind of reevaluating our EVP. And I think, HubSpot as an organization, we're deeply collaborative. We don't believe in silos. We don't believe in pillars. We don't believe in titles for the most part when it comes to these what I would call kind of cross-functional projects. And so when we were mapping out the different phases of the project, the research phase, the brainstorming phase, the messaging phase, the launch phase, the creative phase, all the different phases that honestly you would put into a standard large-scale campaign, we had to make sure we had checks and balances at each of those phases to make sure we were integrating the feedback from the right stakeholders all the way up to our leadership team, to the C-suite, who looked at the research and aligned to our recommendation before we moved on to the brainstorming phase, aligned on that before we moved on to the messaging phase. And one of the questions they would always ask is, well, who did you talk to? Did you talk to the HubSpot brand team? Did you talk to our customers? Did you talk to our engineers to make sure that those perspectives were included? That's very important. And making sure that we left time to do that. And if we got negative feedback, that we were willing to go back to the drawing board and reassess to make sure that it all felt good. Now, you're not going to create an EVP that feels 100% to everybody. That is impossible. We wanted to make sure that we understood the different perspectives and brought that in to, again, make sure that it was authentic to where we were. It should be a little aspirational, right? It should be a little bit, looking forward and where do we think we're going to be and where we want to go. We want you to come along with us on that journey, but it also has to be authentic to where we are now. And that is sometimes the bulk of the discussion. But yeah, I think it's making sure that you plan ahead of time for a highly collaborative experience and a lot of feedback. This is the type of thing that you're going to get a ton of feedback on. And if you're not open to that, it won't work.
We are in a bit of an economic pinch right now, and we've seen major layoffs in large companies. So how do you approach employer branding in a time when companies are downsizing or going through a difficult period?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think one of the most interesting and maybe honestly one of the most challenging parts of employer brand is no matter what's happening in the market, no matter what's happening in terms of things like downsizing or changing in hiring plans, our mission stays the same. And that is to talk authentically and tell authentic, people-driven stories about what it's like to work at HubSpot. Whether you have 10,000 open recs or 1,000 open recs or 10 open recs, the story is still the story. And it's our job to make sure that we tell that in a way that's specific to the type of talent that you're looking for, and in a way that's specific to the type of talent that you're bringing on. So for example, if I'm not hiring, I'm going to make this up for the sake of discussion, but if I'm not hiring senior engineers, I shouldn't be pushing out content that features senior engineers, because if the senior engineer sees that, there's going to be nowhere to put them and you've lost that opportunity. And sometimes you only get one shot. So if there's nowhere to send them to try to really kind of capture that lead, if you will, then you've wasted that effort. And so a lot of that is trying to figure out, okay, how do we tell the story in a way that matches where we are as an organization and what we're looking for, but in a way that also helps us keep telling the broader story of what it's like to work at HubSpot, which remains true no matter where we are as a company.
And in times like these, collaboration with internal communications, for instance, in HR becomes very critical, especially when you have different departments and it's not a single department handling these things. So what are some steps that employer branding professionals should take when they work together with HR and maybe corporate communications even to ensure that the messages that are conveyed, however difficult they may be, are conveyed smoothly and also with empathy?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially right now. And I think, the biggest piece of advice I can give is to be unafraid to have tough conversations with other stakeholder groups and to really make sure that the employer brand perspective is included. Now at HubSpot, I will say we're part of HR, as is corporate comms. It's a unique structure. And so we're able to work really closely together. And at one point, employer brand and internal comms were the same team when I came into the organization, which is again unique and really helped with that collaboration and that partnership between myself and my counterpart of the internal comms team. But that's a partnership that has to stay deep. So I can go to her and say, hey, I heard this is happening. Let's talk about it. And she can do the same. I think a lot of that happens through stakeholder engagement and relationship building. But part of it too is being unafraid as an employer brand team to make sure that people understand that you have a perspective that's unique. Because it's not, employer brand or internal comms is typically focused on the internal audiences, your employees, your leadership teams, what that feels like. External comms is primarily focused on the customer and what does the customer think and how can we make sure that we're supporting growth. Employer brand kind of has a foot in both, where we're talking to an external audience, which is your candidate audience that we need to come into the organization to fuel that growth, and also our employees. We have our channels, particularly our Instagram channel, for instance. A big bulk of our followers are our employees, and certainly our content is driven by them. And so in order to do our job in a way that's effective, we have to have deep partnerships with both of those organizations. And that requires weekly one-on-ones. That requires raising your hand if you feel like you're not at a table that you need to be at. And it requires leadership that understands the value of employer brand. And if you don't have that, you have to make sure that you're making the case to leadership to share that value. I'm fortunate at HubSpot that our Chief People Officer, our VP of Recruiting, our leaders across the company understand the value of employer brand and they understand what it can do. And so we're able to be at those tables. But I've worked at organizations where that's not the case. And it is a constant kind of raising your hand, proving the value until you get a seat at that table.
How do you ensure that the employer brand continues to be reflected throughout the transition process? For example, if it's a downsizing or it's a period of layoffs.
Yeah, I think that goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier. And I think it's taking a step back and looking at the entire kind of candidate journey and the employee journey as well. And understanding, I've talked about this before, to me, it's an infinity loop. So employer brand is typically how someone enters your organization, that's how you attract the talent. Then they typically go into the recruiting process. If everything works out, they're onboarded. Eventually, they're going to become alumni, whether they leave on their own or they're asked to leave, whatever the situation is, they become alumni. And we want them to look back on their time here as a time where they grew, whether they were supported, it was an inclusive environment. So maybe one day they'll boomerang and come back. And I think that remains true no matter what the situation is. And as an employer brand team, we really focus on how can we make sure that the stories we're telling at the beginning of that infinity loop are authentic and true to what they're going to experience. So when they do leave for whatever reason, it feels like the experience matched their expectations.
So let's talk about technology a little bit, Ashlee. There are plenty of tools that automate hiring, such as our ATS at Manatal. How might technology help with elevating the EVP?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of technology available, more and more becoming available that can really help in the employer brand space. A lot of those are traditional marketing tools. How can we automate gathering content? How can we make that content authentic? Not everything has to be super polished all the time. How do we make it easy for our stakeholders to give us that content? And how do we automate getting it out onto things like our career site and through our social media channels? So we have some tools that really help us do that, where it's very simple input on our end. Our employees can help us create that content on their own time, and then it goes where it needs to go when that's finished with some QAing on our side. Also, a lot of automation going on in the social media space, as you would anticipate from any content marketing team, just making sure that as much as we can create solutions that are hands off, the more time we're freed up to do these more deep thinking projects like our EVP. And so when we're talking about content creation and distribution, we're always looking for different tools. And we have a good tech stack right now, and I think we may be adding to that in the future to really help us generate content faster and be able to react more in real time as the market continues to change.
And you have, as you've mentioned earlier, you have an interesting transitory experience in this space, Ashlee. What advice would you give someone starting out today in the employer branding space?
Yeah, I think like I said, I don't think I've not met one person who came into employer
Mhm.
brand the same way. And I think that's really exciting because that says that it's an industry, it's a function that there are so many transferable skills that
Mhm.
you can bring into it. I have members of my team who started in recruiting. I have members on my team who started in content marketing, and they both bring a ton to our team and different perspectives, which I think is important. So I would say don't be afraid of imposter syndrome. Don't feel like you've never done this before, so you don't have a shot. I think there's a lot of companies who would disagree. HubSpot is one of those. We don't really believe, we know imposter syndrome is a thing. I feel it. We all feel it. We don't want that to stop people. We really believe in transferable skills. I think especially if you have a marketing or communications background, I think that's a really easy segue, a recruiting background, certainly. So I wouldn't limit yourself by what the experience is. And, employer brand is growing as a function, but we're still a pretty small community.
Mhm.
And I would not hesitate to reach out to me, reach out to anybody that working in the space, and have a conversation about what they're looking for, and what you're looking for, and see if it makes sense, because it's a little different everywhere. And then if we're talking about somebody who is already in an organization, and maybe you're a one-man show, or you're a recruiter who, kind of given the hiring slowdown, has been asked to do some employer brand stuff, and you're like, where do I even start? I think the best advice I can give is to keep it really simple, create some authentic content. And that can be with an iPhone, get somebody to record a video for 30 seconds talking about what they love about working at your company, put it on social, put it on YouTube, push it out over LinkedIn. LinkedIn is your friend by all means. And so I think the more that you can simplify what you're trying to do and gain some traction, and then worry about what it costs and how to amplify it from there, you can at least get started.
Thank you so much, Ashlee, for your time, your insights today. I think they were great, especially for anyone who wants to reassess their EVP and look into how to refine it moving into a more challenging time. And I'm sure the audience, especially those listening and watching, would want to know where to connect with you. So where can they find you?
Sure. Yeah. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. Send me a message. Would love to hear from you. Would love to chat. And then HubSpot as a brand, check out our HubSpot Life channels. We're on Instagram and Facebook, and obviously our career site and YouTube. You can find us anywhere. So please engage with our content, and would love to hear from you. So please reach out.
Thank you so much, Ashlee. And we have
Thanks,
been in
Leah.
conversation with Ashlee Gerow, Senior Manager for Employer Brand at HubSpot. If you like our content, please subscribe to our channels and stay tuned next week for more episodes of All in Recruitment. Thank you.